Presentation
Progress.
as we speak. So you're welcome to stay and watch this. It's going to be broadcast out in the US with Chip Childers. Kind of states what it says there. If you want to hang around and watch it, you're more than welcome to. Still food outside if anyone wants to grab some more food, which is probably a bit cold, but I'm sure it's just as nice.
There's a microwave over there.
Sorry?
Microwave over
Okay.
there.
And there's drinks and stuff out there. So, yeah, please help yourself, guys. And if you want to stay, you're more than welcome to. Thank you.
All right, let's kick things off, everyone. Welcome to everyone across Asia, Pacific, Japan, Middle East, and wherever you happen to be dialing in from. Very excited today to run a very special topic, something that's top of mind for all of you. My name is Josh Lambert. I lead the strategic business consulting practice across APJ. We're very lucky to be joined by Chip Childers, who I'll introduce very shortly. But I think really just to set the scene, I think we're looking at an era that we've not seen before. We've seen many technology trends and fads over the years. I think it's very safe to say this is something that's going to stick. And the reality is that frontier AI is something that it's going to cause an organizational shift. It already is. It's impacting organizations across the world. And the reason is because it fundamentally breaks the math on how we think about traditional security. It closes that gap from the time we detect the vulnerabilities for someone to be able to exploit them from weeks to hours. And across our region, this is causing massive pressure for boards, leaders, security specialists like all of you on the call today. We've got 6-hour mandatory reporting windows. We've got massively expensive breach costs. We've got board mandates. And so this is something that's very much topical for all of you. And today we want to share a bit of a perspective, let's go and talk about a product and more about what we're doing at Broadcom, because we're very similar to all of you. We're faced with very similar challenges and having to navigate this. And it probably comes with no surprise that Broadcom leverages a huge amount of open source technologies. We use our own Spring-based applications. We're heavily regulated, all those sorts of things. So we're having to tackle very, very similar challenges to all of you. And so for that, I really want to introduce Chip Childers, who's joining from the US East Coast. I think it's very late there. Welcome, Chip. Chip leads our security, compliance, open source, and privacy engineering at Broadcom. He's our resident guru. And today, we want to get him to share a bit of thoughts around how we're tackling this at Broadcom. What have we learned? What's the testing shared? What's our defensive strategies? So I'm going to stop talking. Chip, welcome to the call. Thank you for joining so late in the evening. I'd love to hear what you've got to say.
Outstanding. Thanks for having me, everybody. And Josh, thanks for the introduction. And actually, before I get started, we should have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions that come to your mind as we're going, use the Q&A feature of the webinar, and we'll be sure to spend some time on that. So today we're going to go through this very simple agenda. Right? We're going to talk about the threat. We're going to talk about using AI as a defensive tool, because I work in the world of defending our products and helping to defend you, our customers. And then last, we'll give you a little bit of practical guidance, right? Some of it not specific to our products, just generally how you should think about it. And this has come from a lot of conversations we've been having around the globe with plenty of large organizations, companies, governments, etc. So, as Josh said, look, we are actually in a little bit of an unprecedented time. There's certainly all of the typical excitement and hype that happens when there's a technology transition that's beginning, and not to dismiss any of the wonderful marketing from the AI labs that are out there. This is actually a material change in what we're seeing in at least the cybersecurity space, if not other parts of the technology industry that are being impacted. Broadcom has a very good relationship with the Frontier AI Labs, and in particular, we were one of the first 10 organizations to have access to a model called Mythos that comes from Anthropic. Now, that really, the Mythos story is sort of the initial, let's say, starter pistol for the race. Other labs are coming out with sophisticated models that are approaching the same level as Mythos, if not beginning to exceed it. And so we're at this point in time where the threat landscape that cyber defenders need to be concerned about is shifting. Right, the time to exploit, from disclosure to live exploit being exploits occurring in the wild, has reduced dramatically. The number of disclosed vulnerabilities that are actually 0-day has increased dramatically. And you pair that with the models that are able to effectively operate relatively autonomously. It really is becoming an environment where threat actors are able to advance the state of the art for their approach, and as defenders, we have to do the same. So when we talk about frontier models, frontier AI models generally, or just really LLMs and generative AI more broadly, regardless of whether you're on the frontier or whether you're using slightly earlier model generations, LLMs are remarkably good at doing a few things around code level security. So they're able to discover at a volume and velocity that's really unparalleled. As a company that invests very heavily in the security of our software, that has offensive security testers, has lots of all of the modern tools, we're finding an order of magnitude more vulnerabilities in our code than we ever have. They've always been there. We're just able to now uncover them at a much faster pace. So it's this ability to find these 0 days that, if not done by the defender, represents a weapons cache, essentially, for the threat actors. The other thing these models are able to do, and this becomes a lot more capable as you get closer to the latest frontier models, which are really the best at this, they're able to do much more creative chaining of individual vulnerabilities. And that's both hypothetical. As they look at a code base, they find a couple of mediums, they maybe find a low severity, and they can come up with creative ways to use them to allow an attacker to get from no access to full access, or to whatever level of access they get after the chain is executed. But also in live environments, as frontier models are being used for offensive security testing, they're able to discover lower severity vulnerabilities that get them to the next step as they work their way into a system. New baseline, really, we're going through a transitional period right now. Our belief is that we'll come out with everyone's software being much more secure, because we'll have the power of LLMs, and they'll be able to find these vulnerabilities, and we'll be able to fix them faster. But software doesn't stay still, because we're going to keep building features. Your open source projects are going to continue. All of your vendors are going to keep developing their software. And so as the software changes, just because you found all the vulnerabilities in the past, it doesn't mean new ones won't be introduced. So we're entering a world where the velocity of finding and exploitation is going to be really, really fast. So we have to be able to protect around that. So just to give you a very specific example, because it's open source and the models are most effective when they have access to source code, we can look at the Spring framework, very popular Java framework. 60% of some number, roughly 60%, I think is what the number is, of Java applications, modern Java applications, run based on Spring. Spring framework is an open source project that Broadcom is the steward of. We do a commercial offering of it, but it's open source. Many organizations are using it. And so what you can see in this chart here is that if we really just look at the green bar, we saw a massive increase as the use of LLMs increased pretty dramatically in March and then April. But more importantly, as we used it internally, because we've been really working hard on making sure that we know how to use these models very, very effectively, we had a huge spike in the number of findings. Now, we're working through those, and our Tanzu division is releasing rapidly, but you can really see there was a material shift, right? This is orders of magnitude, larger number of findings. So that's the threat landscape we're in. So how do we think about using LLMs as defenders? The first thing I'd say is that Broadcom, across our divisions, is now deeply integrating various models, but in particular frontier models for the purpose of finding and preventatively fixing vulnerabilities. One of the interesting things about these LLMs is we say, look, they're very good at finding vulnerabilities. They're very good at fixing vulnerabilities. But if you don't ask them to do that, they don't do it. So if you ask it to create some code for you, to create a feature, let's say, just because we might use Mythos to create the feature, it does not mean that it's going to be secure code. So building pipelines is really important, and we've put a lot of investment into that here. But if I step back and don't just talk about how we deliver products, Broadcom is an enterprise. And I spend a good bit of time talking with our CIO, making sure that we're staying in sync from the R&D side and he on the IT side of the business. And what we're realizing is there's basically two buckets for how we can use LLMs in a good defensive manner. So the first one is operational security, and the second is going to be in that software development process, whether it's for a product or an internal software that you're building for your company. On the operational security side, the models are remarkably good. In particular, frontier models are very good at helping you with ongoing enterprise penetration testing. They're great at patch verification and deployment. So if we ship you a patch, another vendor ships you a patch, you can use LLMs to much more easily automate the process of accepting that patch, doing regression tests around it, and then rolling it out. Anomaly detection is another big thing that a lot of companies are starting to do. In particular, if you think about all the operational telemetry data that can come out of your environment, right? Whether that's NetFlow, whether that's logging data, whether it's other forms of network trace. All of that is a really rich source for identifying if threat actors are operating in your environment or even attempting to get into it. Models are very good at taking that raw data and looking for anomalies. And last but not least, the incident response and forensics process. We're actively using frontier models as part of our planned incident response process. It's going to be able to speed things up for us when we're going to suffer a breach. On the software development side, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next few slides, but we've really focused on helping us do application threat modeling, vulnerability assessments, again, embedded in the pipelines. We definitely do pre-production penetration tests of our software, and then we're deeply inspecting our software supply chain. All the dependencies that get pulled into our products, that get pulled into our enterprise systems. And models are able to allow us to scale that, right? So our individual engineers could never do all of the reviews of all of the bits that flow into our products, but we can do that now with the help of LLMs. So using an example, again, I'm going to go back to Spring, just again, because it's open source. You're going to see the vulnerabilities all get fixed and disclosed out in the open. So it's a great example for me to use. So as you're building applications in your own company, if you're using Java, you might be using Spring, and it typically looks something like this. You have your application code, and then you have some sort of framework, maybe the Spring framework, all of its associated modules, and then there's going to be dozens to hundreds of other dependencies that get pulled into this. All of that represents the application's attack surface. So when we talk about protecting a perimeter, you have to consider the applications you're exposing out to the internet as well, or to the users in untrusted networks. So perimeter is not just network firewalling, it's not just endpoint devices, it's everything that you can access from outside the enterprise or outside the trusted environment. So the way that we're putting LLMs into our pipelines, it's actually really using these models in two ways at the same time. So the first way is that we see the frontier models as a force multiplier for our security engineers. And so we do a lot of what we call exploratory testing. right? That's pairing with a model, setting objectives for a target to go after, asking probing questions, pointing it at weak spots, kind of defining the rules around which it should operate on a particular penetration test as an example, and evaluating the results. Again, paired security engineers with the model. All of this happens in a very experimental way. But what it also allows us to do is, as we discover something new through offensive testing, we're able to now ask the model to provide us with information about how to describe this vulnerability type. And we can take that description and shift it down into the pipeline execution process, where we have a rather robust skill that's been created that we use internally that takes source code as input, context for what the source code is supposed to be, right? If it's a product, how does it run? What are the typical network environments that it would sit within? And all of that is useful input to the process. And then our skill breaks apart the process of evaluating the code into 7 major steps. So it'll survey the software, it will come up with a partitioning or sharding logic, right? So it isn't typically file by file. So we may ask the model to say, look, what you want to do is find all the authentication flows and consider those to be a particular shard that we can work through. Then we go through the detection process, and that's where we go really parallel. So we can scan very, very large code bases. Each individual shard has multiple sub-skills run against it that look for things like authorization logic, cryptographic logic, a number of different common weaknesses. Then it goes through chain identification as part of that as well. 4th stage, verification. Again, parallel execution. The verification process allows the model to have separate context runs. They can go back and recheck the work that occurred during the detection phase. And this is how we drive out false positives from the result set. Step 5, deduplication occurs. Step 6, and this is where it can get a little bit dangerous, but you create proof of concepts, right? So what is the code that is a proof of concept that isn't weaponized, but is enough to allow a developer or another pipeline agent sitting in a pipeline to understand what essentially is the test case to prove the vulnerability, and then if that code no longer works, to prove that it's been fixed. Last, there's a dependency assessment that we run on all of our repositories, and that gets back to the idea of looking at our full supply chain. Known vulnerabilities in that supply chain exist, and so we need to see if our code is touching any of the parts of those dependencies that may have vulnerabilities that would impact the way our product or the way our application works. Outputs here are, you get a very clear description of the vulnerability itself. We get CDSS scores, both raw and also based on an operational environment context. So it will typically downgrade, based on how we describe the runtime environment. There's a proposed fix, a verification test. Again, that was coming from the proof of concept, and then additional chain analysis to give you all the possible chains that the model was able to find. So that's how we use it as a defensive tool inside of Broadcom. I'll give you a little bit of guidance. And this is, again, based on what we think are best practices. A lot of security principles are still very, very, very solid and very sound. Having advanced frontier models be in the hands of a threat actor doesn't change the principles of security. It just simply requires that we go back and reconfirm that we haven't cut corners, or we haven't decided not to do something that really should be done, but we figured, well, for whatever reason, it wasn't necessary at the time, or it just wasn't prioritized. So the way that we think about the changes, though, in security practices are, one, harden the edge first, right? Another way to say this is that threat model-based view of your environment is the right way to think about your patching strategy. There are already starting to be so many different vulnerabilities and patches sent out by vendors and open source projects that you have to come up with a way to prioritize them. And we think that a threat model-driven approach is more appropriate than just looking at raw severities, because again, the model's ability to chain those lower severities together to create kill chains that are much more severe, that's not going away. And so when you chain across multiple products, it's better to think about hardening the edge first. What's your threat model? Prioritize based on that. Second is run only on supported software. I mean, this seems like a very obvious statement, but we all do it, right? We all have software that's no longer in support, whether that's a system on a box that's kind of running in the corner you don't want to touch, or whether it's dependency of the code that you write. Run only on supported software. Deploy mitigation capabilities is also important, right? We're not going to be able to fully just patch our way through this. Everyone needs to think about mitigation capabilities, right? So it could be something like, depending on the environment, you need EDR, virtual patching options, intrusion prevention capabilities. All those are really important. Now, I said we're not going to be able to patch our way through it. However, accelerating the patching process is also super important. So that's something that if you haven't figured out how to automate, now's the time. Also, the traditional approach of an N-1 adoption strategy may no longer be appropriate for your organization. It's going to depend on your organization and your risk appetite. But there's a spectrum between stability by not updating and rapid patch adoption for the purpose of security. And each organization might need to reconfirm where they are on that spectrum. And likely, most companies, most organizations are going to want to accelerate their patching process pretty significantly. Fifth, reassess configurations. Quite frankly, misconfiguration or lack of hardening of software is probably the most common way that after initial access is gained, that we see threat actors elevating privileges or getting deeper into an environment and becoming persistent. Ensure that comprehensive logging and monitoring, right? If you can't track it, you're never going to be able to.
Can we just cut them off? Yeah.